partial equilibrium. So till now, what we have seen is we looked at consumer theory. And in consumer theory, we basically saw how a consumer's demand function is formed. So demand for any good X was a function of income of the consumer, price of good X, price of other goods. Then we came to producer theory. And in producer theory, we saw how the marginal cost of the cost function, basically how the cost function is formed. So cost function is a function of quantity which needs to be produced, wage rate and rental rate. Okay, so we saw these two things. And then we got into game theory. And the aim of game theory was to basically look at strategic decision making. Basically, we would obtain Nash equilibrium where firms, players would choose strategies SI and S minus I. So SI star, S minus I star, so that would be the Nash equilibrium. So now we want to bring together the concepts of these three topics and basically look at how equilibrium is achieved in the market for any good. Take the market for any good X. Okay, so how is the equilibrium going to be achieved? That is, when do we have demand equal to supply for this particular good X in this market? Okay. So first, let us look at how the market demand is formed. So what is market demand? So the quantity of any good X demanded by individual J is, I know it's given by the demand function, which we found in the first chapter. It was a Marshallian demand function. Sorry, I've written it here. Marshallian demand. Okay, so this was the Marshallian demand function. We used to get this as the intermediate step in finding the utility maximization of the consumer. So XJ is the demand which any person makes from the market. So the total market demand is the summation of demands coming from all the individuals in the market. So suppose the market consists of just the market of Delhi. So everybody who's living in Delhi, the demand of all these people summing up together would give you the total market demand in Delhi. So suppose this was the demand curve for any individual. So it's going to be a downward sloping curve for normal goods. So we are going to assume that all goods are normal. There are no given or inferior goods. Okay, so we are going to assume that all goods are normal. So unless otherwise stated, all goods are going to be normal. So the market demand for individual one is downward sloping like this. The other good, the other person's market demand curve looks like this. So now I want to find the market demand where market has only these two individuals, individual one and two. So the total market demand for this good here would be the sum of these two demands. Now market demand is basically quantity as a function of price. Total quantity as a function of price. So for any given level of price, what is the total quantity being demanded? So this is equals to Q1 as a function of price plus Q2 as a function of price. So total quantity demanded is nothing but quantity demanded by person one plus quantity demanded by person. So here we look at this market demand curve. So for any given level of price like this, the demand for person 1 is going to be this much, the demand for person 2 is going to be this much. So total demand is going to be x1 star plus x2 star. We do this for different levels of prices and we'll get the total market. So let's do a quick example. Let income of person 1 be equal to 12, income of person 2 equals to 24. Utility of both the agents is under root xi yi, and px equals to 2, py equals to 3. All right, so find, okay, sorry, px has to be variable. It will be a function of px, so just py equals to 3. So find the market demand x as a function of px. All right. So first I have to find the demand function for person 1. So find the demand function x1 as a function of px. Okay, so x1 as a function of px. To find that, I would use my utility maximization rules. So that is MRS equals to price ratio and budget constraint. So what is the budget constraint for person 1? Yuvakshi, what is the budget constraint for person 1?
Sir, 12.
What 12?
12 rupees.
No, the equation. I'm asking the equation, Yuvakshi. Budget constraint is an equation.
Sorry, sir. Sir, it was
Sorry.
xpx plus ypy.
So what is py?
Sorry, sir. Sir, xpx plus 3py. Sorry, 3y plus 3y.
Yeah. Okay. What is the MRS equals to price ratio equation? Kanishka.
Sir, px upon 3 equal to y upon x.
Okay. Now, can you use these two equations group to give me a relationship between? Can you a relationship between x and px? Basically, I want you to eliminate y from the equation by using these two equations.
So 12 is equal to xpx plus 12 is equal to 2xpx by 3.
Sorry, can you repeat it?
12 equal to 2xpx.
2xpx, very good, which implies x is equals to 6 by px.
Yes.
Okay, so this is demand for good one, x1 equals to 6 by px. Similarly, for person 2, give me x2 as a function of px.
Sir, x2 equal to 12 by px.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, you have xi equals to I by 2 pi px. So that's what the formula is. In any case, even if you don't remember the formula, you should be able to do this simple things because this is just budget constraint and MRS equals to price ratio. So now I have x1 and x2. So now the final thing is total demand. So total demand of good X as a function of Px is X1 as a function of Px plus X2 as a function of Px. So that will be equal to 6 by Px plus 12 by Px. So that's just 18 by. So that is the total market demand when these two people are in the market. Okay. All right. So that's the total market demand, and that's how you find the total market demand. So this gives you the market demand function. Now, how does the market demand function shift? How does the market demand function shift? So remember that market demand is a function of three things: income, price of good X, and price of good Y. Now, when Px changes, you move along the demand curve. But when either of income or Py would change, then your market demand curve itself would shift. Okay, so suppose this is your total market demand curve. It's going to be a downward sloping curve. Okay, this is your X. This is your price of good X. Now suppose income rises. So income of person one increases and income of person two also increases. Then what would be the effect on this demand curve? How would it change?
It will shift to the right.
Very good. It will shift to the right because people are getting richer, and since it's a normal good, everybody would demand more of this commodity. So for any given level of prices, both people will start demanding more, so it will move to right. Okay. So for rising incomes, it moves to right. Suppose Py increases for the same commodity, by the way, for the same utility function. I'm talking about a continuation of this example. So suppose Py increases. So what would be the impact of increase in price of good Y on the
So it will
market?
shift rightwards.
Okay, so
If it is a
guys,
substitute,
I'm talking about this utility function. I'm talking about this example. So I've given you the entire math. After this, there is no scope for subjectivity about if it is this and that. There's no if and that. You have to be absolutely certain because I've given you the exact functional form itself.
So it will shift to the left.
Okay. Yuvakshi,
so it
what's
will
your take
shift
on
to
it?
the right.
Yes, yes. Sorry, sir. Yeah, right.
And Yuvakshi, what's your take?
Sir, maybe to the right.
Maybe. Oh. Maybe is a good word. You'll get 0 marks for me writing maybe in any answer. Because maybe is never correct. Okay. If you are guessing, never say maybe. That's my advice. If you're guessing, don't say maybe, because then you are getting 0 marks with certainty. It's better to get some positive marks with some probability rather than getting 0 with certainty. Because see, the demand for good from person one is I1 by Px. Demand for good from person two is I2 by Px. So total demand for good X is I1 plus I2 by Px. It is independent of Py completely, so it will remain at the same position. Okay. So here, just because you feel that something is changing, so kuch to badalna chahiye, you cannot digest ki it can remain at the same place. That's what's happening here. Okay, you have the formula in front of you, and you know that it is completely independent of Py. yet you couldn't arrive at that because in our mind we are hardwired to think that kuch badla hai to kuch to badalna chahiye hoga. It cannot remain, the status quo should not be maintained, but that's what will happen here. The function is completely independent of price of good y. Okay, now final thing, what will happen if px changes?
Sir, movement along the same curve.
Very good, movement along the curve. That's what I started with, right? If px changes, you move along the curve. If income of py changes, then the curve might shift. Okay, it need not always shift, like we saw, may shift. All right. Now short run demand shock. So what happens when the demand of a good suddenly shoots up? So suppose there's a band call, or suppose this is something we saw recently. There was when the lockdown was imposed, suddenly the people started stocking up on necessities. So the price of a lot of necessities like rice and atta, it's shot up because people started buying it in bulk. People believe that there might be a scarcity of those things. So what happens in this short-run demand shock is that you have a demand curve, a market demand curve, which looks like this. But suddenly, due to some unforeseen reason, the demand curve shoots up. Suddenly, people start demanding more of this commodity for whatever reason, a change in their preferences, basically. But the amount available in the shops is still limited. Shops do not have the time to get new inventory from the manufacturing firms. So the amount of supply is constant in the short run. Okay. So what happens is this increase in demand basically leads to an increase in prices. The same amount which would have been sold earlier gets sold now. It's just that it gets sold at a higher price. Okay, so the price goes up, but the amount of sales which happen is going to be the same. So this is a short run demand shock. All right, now let's look at supply. First, let's look at short run supply. So what do you mean by short run? What is the implication of short run? What is the implication of short run, which is there an entire chapter on short
So,
run?
short run means when the factors are classified into two, the fixed factors and the variable factors, the fixed factors which cannot be changed in a short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, generally we say capital is fixed. So capital is fixed in short run. Okay, so capital is fixed and labor is variable. So short run means capital is fixed. Okay, so in the short run, so this is the marginal cost function. Suppose this is the short run marginal cost function of the firm. Highlight this. This is the short run marginal cost curve of the firm. Now, short run marginal cost is going to be equal to, sorry, suppose so suppose the firm is operating in a competitive market. So we saw that in a competitive market, what happens is that profit function becomes equal to price minus cost. Okay, so sorry, price into quantity minus cost as a function of quantity. So when you do d pi by dq, it becomes equal to p minus marginal cost, which should be equal to 0. So price must be equal to marginal cost. So in short run, this should be equal to short run marginal cost. So this becomes the supply curve. Supply curve of the firm. So this is the short run marginal cost. So supply curve should be ideally along this short-run marginal cost. So this represents the price equals to short-run marginal cost represents the supply curve of the. Now the thing is that sometimes when the price is too low, it could be profitable for the firm to actually shut down and not produce anything. Okay? So this happens. So the firm chooses to shut down when price is below this level. So this price is when short run marginal cost is less than short run average variable. When this happens, what happens is that your revenue is lower than your variable cost. Okay, so what happens when revenue is less than variable cost? So like you said, there are variable costs and there are fixed costs. Now a firm will decide to shut down. A firm shuts down in short run if if the revenue R is less than variable cost. Now what is revenue? Revenue is price into quantity. What is variable cost? Variable cost is short run average variable cost into quantity. Okay, so this is short run average variable cost. So when you cancel out the quantities, you get when price is less than short run average variable cost. And since it's competitive, firm price must be equal to short run marginal cost. So whenever short run marginal cost is less than short run average variable cost, you would have the firm shutting down. Okay, so it doesn't mind making a losses, by the way. It doesn't mind making a loss. It does not want to make a loss on variable cost. At least जितना variable cost है उतना work out होना चाहिए. Okay, because the fixed cost anyway it has to pay. So it does not worry about the fixed cost anymore because it has to pay it no matter what. It only worries about the variable cost. Okay, so let's do a problem here to see what could be this thing. So let the supply function be quantity equals to under root KL. Wage rate is 1, rental rate is 1. I'm making this easier for you guys. So find the shutdown price. If K bar equals to 60. If the fixed capital is 16, you have to find the shutdown price. So remember, shutdown price is when these two things become equal. So the step one must be to find the short run marginal cost function. Step two must be to find variable cost, and then variable cost by quantity would be equal to your short run average variable cost. So first you find these two things and then see when short run marginal cost becomes lower than short run average variable cost. Okay. Now, ideally, you would want to find these in terms of quantities. So don't worry about prices. Okay, just find the quantity level at which. So you see, there's also this quantity level. You can either find the shutdown price P1 or you can find this quantity level Q1. What I mean is you can get both these functions as a function of quantity and then equate them. And then go from quantity to prices. The idea is first finding out the functions themselves, which you know by now how to. Do we have the short-run marginal cost curve?
Sir, is it Q by 8?
Q by 8. Okay. Any other answers? So first you have to find the cost function. So cost function, if you want to produce any quantity Q, so Q must be equal to under root 16 into L, which implies the amount of labor you need to hire is Q square by 16. Okay, so this is the amount of labor you would hire. So the cost function would be equal to 16 into, sorry, K bar into rental rate. So this is the fixed cost plus variable is wage into N. So this is going to be 16 into 1 plus Q square by 16. That's the labor value into wage rate is 1. So this is the cost function. So short run marginal cost is del C by del Q, which is 2Q by 16. So that is Q by. So yes, it is Q by 8. What about short run average variable cost? Now you have the variable cost.
Q by 16.
Very good. Very good. So total cost, once you get the total cost, you can break it down into fixed cost and variable cost. Right. So variable cost equals to Q square by 16. So average variable cost will be equal to variable cost by Q, which is going to be equal to Q by 16. Right. So I have to find situations where short-run marginal cost is less than short-run average variable cost. But what you see here is that short-run marginal cost is always greater than or equal to short-run average variable cost, because this thing is Q by 8 and this thing is Q by 16. So if I plot it on the axes, what happens is that short-run marginal cost is Q by 8 and short-run average variable cost is this. So the reverse is never true. So the firm never shuts down. The important thing is to being able to find these curves. So obviously, if I give you some other example, maybe you can find curves which in which you can find this relationship where this thing holds, that for some quantity, still some quantity, short-run marginal cost is less than short-run average variable cost.
So the
Suppose
equal
that
to
was,
sign is for zero quantity, right?
yeah, for zero.
Okay.
Suppose this were your short-run marginal cost function, something other than this. Okay, so this would have been your shutdown quantity and this would have been your shutdown price. Okay, so had your short-run marginal cost been something else, then this could have been your shutdown price. So this is how you could find it in some situation. All right, now, so this is the supply curve. So the supply curve for any one firm in a competitive market would basically look like this. That till shutdown price, it is zero. The quantity supplied is going to be zero till shutdown price. Beyond shutdown price, it's going to move along the short-term marginal cost curve. Is this thing clear? That till P1, which is the shutdown price, this firm produces nothing. As soon as it goes higher than P1, as soon as price goes higher than P1, there's a discontinuous jump to this quantity level Q1. So the supply curve is discontinuous at the shutdown price. And this is true for all firms. So for different firms, I would have different shutdown prices. So this looks like the supply curve for two different firms. So suppose a market is being supplied by just firm A and firm B. There are only two firms which are supplying the entire market. But I'm still assuming that they are perfectly competitive. Okay, so two firms, but still perfectly competitive. So they are price taking firms. I'm not assuming duopoly right now. Okay, don't assume duopoly. They are still competitive, they are still price takers. Only then supply curve makes sense. So what happens? We'll do duopoly cases later, by the way. Here we are trying to look at what happens in a competitive market. So this firm shuts down at P1 shutdown, and this firm shuts down at P2 shutdown. So suppose that P1 shutdown is less than P2 shutdown. Okay, suppose this price level is 5, this price level is 8, for example. So till price level 5, no firm wants to supply. Both firms stay out of the market. So till price level 5, no firm wants to supply in the market. So the total market supply is going to be 0. But between 5 and 8, only first firm supplies to the market. So the supply curve will look like the supply curve of just the first firm. But as soon as price reaches the level 8, it goes beyond 8, firm 2 also enters the market. So now the supply curve is going to be the sum of these two curves. So for any given price level, let's say P1, the total quantity supplied will be Q1 plus Q2. Q1A plus Q1B. Okay, firms are A and B. So the total quantity supplied will now be the horizontal summation of these curves. So it will look like this. So in the end, what you have is a very discontinuous supply curve. So the actual supply curve looks like this, this, and this. So it is discontinuous at multiple points. So the number of discontinuities will depend on what the shutdown prices of these firms are. Okay. So let us try to find the total market supply function. So find the supply function of a market with rental rate 3, wage rate 12, that is supplied with 100 identical firms with production function Q equals to under root KL for each firm. Assume that fixed capital is 80. So I've already seen that for root KL, there is no shutdown price. So you don't have to worry about shutdown price. Okay, so for root KL type of function firms, you will have no shutdown price. Okay, so you don't worry about shutdown. Just find the short-run marginal cost function for one of the firms. So that will give you price as a function of quantity, which can be inverted to get quantity as a function of price. So first find the short-run marginal cost function. Let me write down the details on a separate page. Q equals to root KL, rental rate 3, wage rate 12. Okay, so Q equals to under root KL, rental rate 3, wage rate 12, K bar equals to 80. So first step is find short-run marginal cost function for an individual firm. So what's going to be the short-run marginal cost function?
Sir, 3q by 8. Sorry, no, I'm wrong.
No?
Wait, should be 3q by 10, not 8.
3q by 10.
Yeah, this is what I am getting.
Finding this thing is
So
pretty
3q by
straightforward.
40.
You're actually waiting
So
for your answer.
3q by 10.
Okay, so let me see who of you is winning this one. So cost function. So first we have find the labor demand for any quantity Q. So if you are producing quantity Q, it should be under root 80 into L, which implies L must be equal to Q square by 80.
Yes, so
Okay.
3q by 10.
So cost must be equal to WL plus RK. So 12 into Q square by 80 plus 3 into 80, right? So this just becomes what? Divided by 4, so 20 here, 3 here. So cost is 3, short run cost is 3q square by 20 plus 240. Okay, so short run marginal cost equals to del short run cost by del q. So that is going to be equal to 3q by 10. Okay, so just this part is constant, so that becomes. So 3q by 10 is the short run marginal cost. And in a perfect competition, this must be equal to price. So this means that quantity by any individual firm QI must be equal to 10p by 3. So at any price level, one firm is supplying 10p by 3 quantity. Okay, so quantity supplied by ith firm equals to 10p by 3 implies total quantity supplied is summation of all QI going from I equals to 1 to 100. Now, since all firms are identical, each QI would be 10p by 3, so that's going to be identical. So you just have 100 into 10p by 3, so that is 1000 p by. Is this clear? Okay, so this is how you find the market demand curve. Now you can invert it also. So Q equals to 1000 p by 3. This is the market demand curve. The inverse demand curve is P is equals to 3Q by 1000. So this is the inverse demand curve. So this is the demand curve. And this is the inverse demand curve. Right. Now, if for some reason the demand for good increases. So sorry, what is the market equilibrium now? So the market equilibrium is very straightforward demand curve. Then we saw how to get the demand curve. We saw how to get the supply curve. The intersection will give the equilibrium market demand and market price and quantity. Okay. Now, let us look at how this equilibrium changes if you change some of the parameters. So the market is said to clear on being equilibrium when goods demanded is equals to goods supply. So demand curve and demand function and supply function become equal. Now, if for some reason the demand for good increases, so suppose this was the initial demand curve, now some change happens because of which demand curve shifts up. Maybe because of increase in incomes of people or change in price of some other commodity, this thing goes up. So if this thing happens, then the new equilibrium would be here. So now at new equilibrium, the market price has gone up, the total quantity has gone up. So let's look at what's happening at the level of a typical firm. So at a typical firm, initially it was producing at this level of price and quantity. Now, because of this increase in demand coming from individuals, which leads to a shift in demand curve of the market, each individual firm is now supplying a quantity, a higher quantity, and selling it at a higher price. Right? Because for any level of price, see, this is the new equilibrium price. Right? So if the new equilibrium price rises, this is the supply curve. Right? Short-run marginal cost curve is a supply curve. So at this level of price, it will be willing to supply a higher one. Okay. All right. So let us analyze this particular situation. Let me copy this curve instead. Let's analyze this. So initially it was producing at this point. All right. So assume that at this point, the total profit was pi naught. Suppose the total profit was pi naught level of price profit. From here, it moves to this. Now at this point, the increase in revenue because of the new point, the increase in revenue, the total revenue will now be basically price into quantity. So that is this much. This is the revenue, right? Price into quantity, P2 Q2. So revenue at point 2 is equals to P2 into Q2. Now, if I want to compare the change in revenue, so the initial revenue was this much. This was initial revenue, P1 Q1. Revenue at point 1 was P1 Q1. So the change in revenue is equals to P2 Q2 minus P1 Q1. So this becomes your delta R. This border of this rectangle becomes the change in revenue. Now change in cost. So it is producing a higher quantity. So the costs will go up. So this will just be change in variable cost because fixed cost is fixed. Fixed cost will not change. Now change in variable cost is just area under the SMC curve. Variable cost is change in short-run marginal cost. So this is just going to be equal to this much. So this region, this blue region, let me call it, okay. So this pink region is the change in cost. So the new profit the change in profit is going to be delta R minus delta G. Increase in revenue minus increase in cost. Now, as you can see, change in revenue is larger than change in cost. So the change in profit will actually be this much. This region is change in profit, which is positive. Implies pi prime is equals to pi naught plus delta pi, which is greater than pi naught. Pi naught plus delta pi is greater than pi naught because delta pi is positive. So the profit of every firm increases. So bottom line is that profit of all firms increase. Profits of all firms are going to increase. So all firms start making higher profits. So what will happen is an outsider firm looks at this market and sees that the firms in this market are making a lot of profit and they get enticed. They want a piece of the pie. So what will happen is more firms will enter this market. Okay. So the timeline is that demand for any curve, any individual goes up. This leads to the entire demand shifting up, which leads to the prices increasing, which leads to profit of any firm J increasing, which implying that more firms enter the market. Now, what would be the impact of more firms entering the market? So if more firms enter the market, let us go back to this thing. And let me draw a new curve altogether. Do I have this? No. So what happens when more firms enter the market? So suppose initially there were only two firms supplying to the market. So for any price level, the total supply curve would be the horizontal summation of these two firms. But now if one more firm enters the market, then the total supply would be the summation of these three firms now. So the total supply function will shift rightwards, become flatter than it was. Now at any price level, three firms are supplying to the market. So at any price level, suppose this was Q1, this was Q2, and this is Q3. So at any price level, initially you were getting Q1 plus Q2, but now you would be getting Q1 plus Q2 plus Q3. So you're getting more quantity. The supply curve. Oh, sorry, I do the demand curve. I'm really sorry. Sorry, I should have drawn the supply curve, right? Sorry, the supply curve. Yeah. So suppose the firms were supplying, supply curves is upward sloping, right? So initially the supply curve was Q1 plus Q2, but now it would become Q1 plus Q2 plus Q3. So the supply curve becomes flatter, shifts right. It will be upward sloping, but it will become flatter and shift right. So what happens here is that the supply curve will now look like this. And in fact, it will keep going right. More firms will keep entering till you don't reach the initial price level. So in equilibrium, what happens is, so the timeline is demand for individual increases, which increases the market demand, which increases the prices, which increases profit of any firm, J, which implies more firms enter the market, which implies that the supply curve shifts down, which implies that prices shift down, which implies that profit of jth firm goes down. And in fact, in equilibrium, it will get back to the initial level pi naught. Now, what is this pi naught? The pi naught is that level of profit at which no extra firms enter the market. So that is the equilibrium profit level, the long run equilibrium. That is what we call the long run equilibrium. So in long run, what happens is firms keep entering or exiting till profits reduce or increase to pi naught, which is assumed to be zero. Not assumed, pi naught is zero economic profit. Now, what is economic profit? Economic profit is profit accounting for the profit after accounting for the opportunity cost. So it's not accounting profit. Accounting profit is the firm is making profit. Economic profit is it's not making profit over its opportunity cost. Basically, when you say that suppose you have 1 lakh rupee to invest. Now, if you keep it in a bank, you get 7% interest rate. So the profit that you get is 7% from this 1 lakh rupees. Now, if there was a business venture in which you could invest this 1 lakh rupees and get 10% return, the accounting profit that you get would be 10%. Okay, so what I'm saying is, suppose you have 1 lakh rupees. Suppose you invest this money in a FD, you get 7% interest. On the other hand, you invest it in a business, you get 10% interest. So the accountant will say that your profit is 10%, but an economist would say that your profit is 3% because you were getting 3%, 7% returns anyway in this outside option of FD. So according to an economist, your economic profit from investing in this business is 3%. So similarly, when you talk about this pi naught term, where firms decide not to enter. So imagine the telecom industry, right? So telecom industry has, let's say, Airtel, you have Vodafone, you have Jio, okay? You have BSNL for its part. It believes that BSNL, government believes BSNL is also here. So yeah, you have these 4 players. So suppose these people start making a lot of profit. So then somebody from the outside would think, okay, this opportunity is good. I should also enter this market. There's huge, these companies are making a lot of profit. So some new player will enter the market. It will increase the supply, reduce the prices. Ultimately, all firms will get back to the initial level. The initial level being pi naught, which in economic terms is assumed to be zero profit. Zero profit means that suppose somebody outside, let's say, uh, uh, let's say Azim Premji or Wipro. Okay, Wipro is looking at this market. Wipro has a lot of capital. So Wipro says that in their existing business, they are getting 7% interest rate return. If they invest in telecom, they get, let's say, more than 7%. So at that case, they would be willing to invest in the telecom sector. So that will increase the number of firms, shift the supply curve and all those things. So the idea is that in economics, we assume that all cost functions are accounting for the opportunity cost. And that's why all profits which are calculated are economic profits. So I'll clarify this with the help of the next example. So handmade bicycle frames are produced by a number of identically sized firms. So total monthly cost for a typical firm is Q cube minus 20Q square plus 100. Okay, this should be small q plus 8,000. Okay, so the cost function for any firm is Q cube minus 20Q square plus 100Q plus 8,000.
Sir, why is the word identical size mentioned everywhere? The firm,
Identically sized means that the capacities are same and their amount of capital is same. So
yes, sir, I got that, but why is it mentioned everywhere? I mean, there is a logic behind it, right?
yeah, the logic is that their capacities are same. The total capacity which these firms can produce is going to be same. It cannot be that you find some quantity which a firm wants to produce, but one of the firms does not have the capacity to produce it. Suppose in equilibrium, you get the result that each firm wants to produce 10 units of bicycles. So it should not be that one of the firms does not have the capacity to produce the required number of bicycles. That's the idea.
Okay.
Q is the number of frames produced per month. Demand function is given by quantity demanded equals to 2500 minus 3P. Where QD is the quantity demanded per month and P is the price. So find the long run. So I have to find the long run equilibrium of this market. Okay. So the long run equilibrium in a question like this typically involves finding four things. One is price. The other is quantity produced by each firm small q, total quantity supplied in the market, and number of firms. This is a new thing. Number of firms. So number of firms means that how many players will be active in this market. This is what I have to find. So obviously market should clear. So I get that n times quantity produced by each firm should be equal to total quantity produced. Here I am making use of this identically sized firms. Each firm can produce quantity Q, and since they are identical in equilibrium, they'll produce the same. They'll want to produce the same quantity, and they will have the same quantity in equilibrium. So NQ must be equal to Q. So this is a relationship which connects these later three variables. Now, another thing is that these firms are competitive. Okay. Yeah. So these firms are competitive. So price must be equal to marginal cost. So first I try to find the marginal cost. So marginal cost would be equal to 3Q square minus 40Q plus 100. Now, the next thing I want to do is that profit of each firm must be equal to C. Now, price is equals to marginal cost. Because it's competitive market, the price must be equal to marginal cost. So profit is price into quantity minus cost as a function of quantity, which is price into marginal cost minus cost as a function of quantity, which is price is 3Q square minus 40Q plus 100. Oh no, sorry. Marginal cost into quantity. Price is marginal cost minus Q cube minus 20Q square plus 100Q plus 8,000. Right. So this becomes 3Q cube minus 40Q square plus 100Q minus q cube minus 20q square plus 100q plus 8,000. So I get a cubic here. So this becomes minus, oh no, 3q. So minus 2q cube minus 40q square plus 20q square is minus 20q square plus 100q minus 100q cancels out, minus 8,000 is equals to 0. So I can remove all the negatives,
Sir, it should
replace
be
them.
plus 2q cube.
Oh yeah. Okay. All right. Fine. 2q cube minus 20q square minus 8,000 equals to 0. All right. Now I have to find the roots of this cubic. Obviously, I'm going to do some substitution and see. So q equals to 20. So at q equals to 20, is this going to solve itself? So twice into 20 cube is 8,000 minus 20 into 20 square is 400 minus 8,000. So that is equals to 0. So q equals to 20 is a solution. So in exam, you will not get such a complicated cubic. You'll see one such example in past years in which you don't get a cubic. In this question, I couldn't generate a better cost function than this. So that's why I had to end up with a cubic. But yeah, so that's the idea, that you will not get such a complicated cubic. Even if you get a cubic like this, you can just substitute and get the answer. Okay, so just try something q equals to 20, some round figures, you get the solution. So q equals to 20 is a solution. So now I have found out what the q value is. So now that I have my q value, I can find the price as well. So the marginal cost at q equals to 20. So price equals to marginal cost at q equals to 20, which is going to be equal to 3 times 20 square minus 40 times 3 times 20 square minus 40 times 20 plus 100. So that is 3 into 400 minus 800 plus 100. So that is 1200 minus 800, 400 plus 100 is 500. So that is the price. So I found out the price. If I have the price, I can use it to generate the total demand. So quantity equals to, using this equation, 2500 minus 3. Okay, so now I have my q equals to 20, capital Q equals to 1000. So total quantity produced is 1000. Quantity produced by one firm is 20, which implies number of firms must be capital Q by small q, which should be equal to 1000 divided by 20. So that is equals to, okay. So n equals to 50. So 50 firms are producing a quantity 20 each in a market with price 500, which has a total demand of 1000. So this is everything I need from this particular problem. This is everything. All right. So one new thing here is making the profit function simple. Okay, so generate profit function, make it simple. So always remember that in a competitive market, the profit of each firm is going to be simple. This is true only for a competitive market. Okay, so for a competitive market, profit of every firm will be simple. All right, next look, next, next, look at economic efficiency and welfare. So what is economic efficiency? So efficiency is basically the area between the supply curve and the demand curve. That is the marginal cost curve and the demand curve. So suppose what is economic efficiency? What is welfare? How do I calculate welfare? So what is social welfare? So suppose this is any marginal cost and this is any demand. And let's suppose that this is the quantity which is being produced. And let's say the selling price is this much. This is the selling price. So the consumer welfare, consumer welfare or consumer surplus is basically the area under demand curve and above price. Now producer surplus or profits over fixed cost. This would be equal to area under price and above marginal cost. So this is my producer surplus. This is my consumer surplus. Now social surplus is equals to consumer surplus plus producer surplus, which is basically this entire thing. Now, as you increase the quantity produced, suppose this is the quantity produced, then the social welfare, the social surplus will become this much. And when you make it this much, the social welfare will become this entire. Now, what happens when I go beyond this? Okay, so first of all, just know that the price is a very important variable in dividing how the social welfare is distributed between consumers and producers. But as far as total social surplus is concerned, it doesn't depend on prices. Okay, so if this was the quantity produced QI, the total social surplus would always be this much. This is the total social surplus. But depending on prices, consumer surplus will change. So if this is the price, consumer surplus will be this much. If this is the price, consumer surplus will be this much. If this is the price, consumer surplus will be this much. So consumer surplus and producer surplus individually depend on what the price level is, but social surplus only depends on the total quantity. Okay. So how the social surplus gets distributed between consumers and producers will depend on prices, but the total value only depends on the quantity produced. Now, what happens when the quantity produced goes beyond this? So remember, consumer surplus is area under demand curve and above prices. So suppose this is the price level. Okay. So let's look at the curves in question, the price curve and the demand curve. Demand. So remember, area has sign to it. So this consumer surplus will be positive, whereas this consumer surplus, since the price is above, sorry, this consumer surplus, since the price is above uh, the demand curve, it will be negative. So let me give these areas some names. Suppose this region is called region A. The magnitude of area is A here. This is B. This is C. So consumer surplus will be A minus B minus, because A is going to be positive, B and C are going to be negative, because consumer surplus is area under demand curve and above price. So since here demand curve is below price, consumer surplus is going to be negative. So minus B minus. Let me get rid of these lines. Let's look at producer surplus now. So producer surplus is area under price. So this is price level, under price and above marginal cost. So price is always above marginal cost. So this entire thing is going to be a producer surplus. So let me call this area as C. This is B. I know this. So producer surplus is equals to C plus, okay, not C. C I've already used. So D. D plus. Now total social surplus will be equal to A plus D minus. Okay. So total social surplus in this case will be A plus D minus C. B doesn't play a role in the total social surplus. It's just A plus D minus. Now, had the price level been this much, at this level, quantity Q1, and suppose this is Q2. So this is the calculation for Q2 level. Suppose you have Q1 level. So I already saw that in Q1 level, the total social surplus is A plus D. So if you compare Q1 with Q2, as you increase the quantity, this is the reduction in social welfare. So this is what you call as the dead weight. The reduction in social welfare from the ideal position. The ideal position is this. So at ideal position, the marginal cost and the demand curves are going to intersect. So this Q1 is nothing but the quantity produced in competitive. Right? So the quantity produced in competitive market is going to be your welfare maximizing equilibrium, in which you get the maximum possible social welfare. So as we saw, if the quantity is lower than this, the social welfare is going to be this much. If quantity goes beyond Q1, then you start getting deadweight losses. So you get negative welfare. So in either cases, your welfare is going to reduce. So welfare is maximized in a competitive market. So that's why we like competition so much. That's why we keep saying that competition must be present. That's why we have this Competition Commission of India. It's a government body whose aim is to maintain the competitive spirit of the market. Okay, so competition is good. That's the So let us look at some examples where competition, where where this welfare maximization might be doing. But first, some simple situations where you tell me what the consumer surplus, producer surplus, and other things are going to be. So this is the demand function. This is the marginal cost curve. Okay, so suppose the government fixes a price ceiling of this much. This is the amount of price which the consumers can charge. Sorry, the producers can charge. So at this price, the quantity which gets sold in the market becomes all right, and this is the maximum price which consumers were milling. The actual market price is P max, at which a quantity Q naught is being supplied. The price, clearing price for Q naught is, let's say, P. Now suppose the areas are, this area is A, this rectangle is B, this is C, this is D. So what is consumer surplus?
Sir, what is P naught again?
P naught is the price which consumer, if this much quantity is being supplied in the market, P naught is the price which could clear the market. Okay, actual demand at P max is this much, Q max. Actual demand is this much, but the actual supply is only Q naught. Right, actual supply is only Q naught. So, okay, I should have. Okay, let's come back to this case again. Maybe we need some more examples to be able to do that. Let's do a case of taxation first. That is somewhat easier to handle. So suppose we have a government which starts including taxes. This is the demand curve. This is the marginal cost curve. Okay, so now I'm introducing a government sector. So what government does is it starts taking a tax. So this is price which consumers pay. This is the tax amount. This is the price which producers or suppliers get. The difference, PC minus PS, is the tax amount which is being charged on every commodity. This is the quantity Q. So the areas are A, B, C, D. Okay. So PC is the price which consumers pay. PS is the price which suppliers get. So for example, Domino's sells a pizza at 100 rupees. You pay 120 rupees because you're paying taxes of 18%. You pay 180 rupees. So price consumer you can imagine as 118, but Domino's only takes 100 rupees. The remaining difference, 18 rupees, goes to the government as tax. Okay, so what is the consumer surplus in this case? Which area represents the consumer surplus?
A.
A, very good. What about producer surplus?
C.
C, amazing. What is this B?
Government revenue.
Very good. Government tax revenue. Okay, so this is, you can call as government surplus. Okay, so A plus B plus C is the total social surplus. So now the formula for social surplus is consumer surplus plus producer surplus plus government revenue. This is a total formula for social surplus. Now what is this D?
Deadweight losses.
Very good. Deadweight loss of taxation. Had the government not done this, I knew what the equilibrium would have been. Had the government not done this, this would have been the equilibrium price. This entire thing would be consumer surplus. This entire thing would be producer surplus. So this much amount of surplus is lost because of taxation. So that is D. So D is deadweight loss of taxation. Now let's do the opposite case of subsidy. Let's do a case of subsidy. Suppose this is the demand curve. So this is the marginal cost curve. This is the demand curve. Okay, so government is now subsidizing the commodity. So the total quantity being sold is, let's say, this much. This is the price which consumers have to pay. This is the price which producers get. So this is price of suppliers. This is price of consumers. This is demand. Okay. All right. This is the subsidy S per unit. Okay. So suppose government is giving a subsidy of 1,000 rupees on a mobile phone. So suppose suppliers charge you 5,000 rupees for a mobile phone, but government says, okay, students need mobile phones to study, सब कुछ online हो रहा है. So the consumers only pay 4,000 rupees. The 1,000 rupees is coming from the pocket of the government. So the areas are A, this area is B, C, D, E, and F. So what is the consumer surplus?
A.
What is
A
the
plus-
price which yeah, tell me through.
A plus B.
A plus B. Okay. What is the price which consumers are paying?
4,000.
4,000. This is the price. This is the demand. What is the quantity which is being sold in the market? This much, Q0. So consumer surplus was area between the demand and the price curve. So what is going to be the consumer surplus again?
A plus B plus E.
Very good. Okay. What is the producer surplus? Remember, producer surplus was price.
A plus B plus F.
What? A plus B plus F. Okay. First of all, the marginal cost curve is this.
Sir, B plus F plus C.
So
Very good. B plus F plus C. Because this is the marginal cost. And the price which firms charge is this much. And this is the quantity as of here. So the total producer surplus is BFC. Okay, C plus B plus F. Now, what is the government surplus?
Sir, it is negative minus D.
Minus of how much?
D.
D.
D for Delhi.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Sir, minus D minus E. No, just D.
Okay. Let's look at it graphically. In mathematical terms, if S is the subsidy being given and Q0 is the quantity being sold, mathematically, what is the total subsidy revenue of the government? Subsidy bill of the government?
SQ0.
Okay. Now, which region here represents SQ0?
Sir, B, C, D, E. The end.
BCDE, this entire rectangle.
Yeah.
For this much quantity, it's giving this much subsidy. So government revenue or government subsidy bill is going to be minus B minus C minus D minus. Now, consumer surplus, producer surplus, government surplus. So social surplus would be equal to just add the variables and add subtract. वही करना है बस.
A plus B plus F A plus B plus F
Are you sure?
minus
ठीक
D
से देखो. Minus
D.
minus D. A plus B plus F minus D. Right? Which is basically this area minus this area. Okay. Now, finding social surplus is very easy always. It is these individual parts which are going to be tricky at times. Okay, so finding social surplus is just you look at the demand curve, the marginal cost curve, and the total quantity being produced, right? So if this is your marginal cost curve, this is, let's say, your demand curve, and this is the quantity, this is social surplus. If this is the quantity, this is social surplus. If this is the quantity, then this minus this minus of this is the social surplus. So getting the total social surplus is always very straightforward. It is how this social surplus is being divided between government and producers is going to be the tricky part. So let's do an example for this one, a mathematical example. So let demand function be equal to 10 minus P. Supply function or marginal cost function be quantity equals to P. Supply function is same as marginal cost function. Okay, so we saw that. So quantity supplied is equals to P. Now, the government imposes a tax value of rupees 2, rupees 1 per unit. Rupees 2 per unit. Rupees 2 per unit. That's the taxation. Okay, so find consumer surplus, producer surplus, government surplus, and social surplus. So in a question like this, always draw some representative figures. You need not draw correct figures, but representative figures will be. So 10 minus P is going to be a 45-degree line downwards. So it will look like this. Supply function is a 45-degree line upwards, so it will look like this. So this is quantity demanded, this is quantity supplied, this is price, this is. So first, forget this part, forget this part, ignore. When ignoring this bit, what is going to be the equilibrium price? Price equilibrium. The equilibrium price is when quantity demanded becomes equal to quantity supplied, which implies 10 minus P must be equal to, which implies P must be equal to 5, which implies quantity must be equal to 5. So this area is the consumer surplus. So how much should be the consumer surplus in this case?
5. Just 10. Yeah.
Consume what?
5. No. Yeah, sorry.
You have to use area of the triangle.
So 12.5.
12.5, yeah. So this height is 5, this base is 5. So consumer surplus is half into base into height, so that is 25 by 2, so that is 12. What about the producer surplus?
So same 12.5.
Yeah, this is still 5, this is also 5 because this point is 5, this is 0, so it's still going to be 12.5. So consumer surplus 12.5, producer surplus 12.5, social surplus is equals to 12. Now let's include taxation. So what happens when the government imposes tax? So now quantity demanded becomes 10 minus price which consumers face. Quantity supplied becomes equal to price which suppliers face. So price consumers, price suppliers become different entities. And a new rule is price which consumers pay minus price which suppliers get must be equal to tax amount per unit, which is equal to 2 rupees. The tax amount is 2 rupees per unit. So if consumer pays PC, supplier should be getting 2 rupees less than that. Because 2 rupees has to go to the government for every sale which happens. So PC minus PS must be equal. Now I want the market to clear. So QD must be equal to QS. So 10 minus PC must be equal to PS. Now PS from here is PC minus 2, which implies twice PC must be equal to 12, which implies PC must be equal to 6. Which implies supplier price must be equal to so now the consumer surplus is the area above the price which consumers pay, which is this much. So now the consumer surplus would be this much. How much is this area? We will need to make use of these equations. Maybe you will need to make use of these equations. I'm not sure what type of approach you take. Basically, you have to find these two arms of the triangle. Once you do that, you can find the area.
8, right? Area.
8, yeah. So this arm is 4 now. And if price level is 6, quantity demanded would also be equal to 4. So this distance is basically equal to this distance, which is 4. So half into 4 into 4. So now consumer surplus becomes equal to, sorry, half into 4 into 4, so that is equal to 8. And this would be a producer surplus by a analogous logic. Producer surplus will also be equal. The consumer surplus is 8 and producer surplus is 8. What about government revenue? How much
It
would
will
be the
also be 8.
Very
Yes,
good.
sir.
It will also be 8 because 4 units are being sold and the government is getting 2 rupees on each unit. So it would be this area. So government surplus is also 8. So what you have in this case is that consumer surplus is equals to producer surplus is equals to government surplus is equals to 8, which implies the social surplus becomes 24. So it was 25 initially. Now it has dropped down to 24. So that reduction is this bit, which is your deadweight loss of taxation. So deadweight loss of taxation is equals to the social surplus with perfect competition minus social surplus with taxes. So that is because this is the maximum possible social surplus. So this is 25 minus 24. By the way, what are the units of deadweight loss? What are the units of all these things? Producer surplus, consumer surplus. What are the units? क्या है यूनिट्स क्या है किलो है लीटर है क्या है यूनिट्स क्या है okay remember that this is all area is x into y so y into x or whatever price into quantity what are the units of price into quantity
Sir, rupees only.
very good rupees because price is rupee per unit rupee per quantity and you multiply it with quantity so the total units are going to be okay so the units of welfare is rupees which is very nice you see I can say the welfare loss is 1000 rupees 1000 रुपए का नुकसान है so that's very nice because people can relate to rupees right so people can automatically understand that what is the loss they can feel the loss so if you say that because of this taxation there's a welfare loss of 10,000 rupees then people can automatically feel what you're talking about okay so that's a very nice thing that the units of this particular calculation for consumer surplus producer surplus tax revenue everything social surplus included all the units are in rupees okay all right so this is an example which I did one example which you have to do is it's your homework again quantity demanded equals to 10 minus price consumers quantity supplied equals to price supplied subsidy equals to rupees per unit. So find consumer surplus, producer surplus, government surplus, social surplus. Now instead of taxation, the government is giving out a subsidy. So we did it analytically here. यहाँ पे हमने analytically इसको handle किया. So you know कि कौन सा area क्या होना चाहिए. Now that you have the equations of the curves and everything, you have to find out the numerical values of these areas. Okay, so we have handled it analytically. Now you need to handle it numerically. Okay, so that's your homework for today. Okay, coming back to this example of quantity constraints. Let's do quantity constraints now. So suppose this is my demand curve. This is my marginal cost curve. So now you have this firm which sorry, you have this government which has artificially restricted the uh, quantity which is being supplied to the market. Let's say. So suppose it restricts the quantity which is being supplied at Q. Now at this level, what happens is that, or suppose not at Cuba, suppose there's a price ceiling of P-max. At this P-max, the max quantity which gets supplied in the market is Q-max. Only this much quantity will get supplied. Now the total demand at P-max is this much. So total demand is, let's say, 1,000, but total supply is only 500. So the government has artificially kept the prices low, because of which the amount which suppliers are willing to supply is less, but the demand is huge. So what happens now is a distribution nightmare or distribution problem. Basically, people are demanding a lot of this product, but there's very less available in the market because the price is kept artificially low. So what happens is that producer surplus is always going to be this. But what the consumer surplus will depend on how this good is being distributed. So one strategy could be first come first serve, FCFS. First come first serve. You come first, you get it first. So this strategy was used by Apple. So Apple initially, when it used to launch its mobile phones, it used to get a huge demand. So what would happen is it would say, okay, it will be available in limited stores, but only people coming first will get it. So what used to happen is that people who have a higher need or higher demand or higher utility from getting this product, they would come and form a line in front of the store 2 days, 1 day or 2 days before the sale is supposed to begin. They would camp there for a couple of days to get the product. So this is first come first serve. So in first come first serve, what happens is people who have a higher demand, they get the product, and this is going to be the consumer service. Another strategy which can be used is random allocation. So what happens in random allocation is 1,000 people are demanding this product. Only 500 people can get this product. So this is a strategy which is used by firms like Xiaomi. Xiaomi uses flash sales. So what happens in flash sales is that people get this product randomly. Everybody applies to get this product, and on the day, a random lottery picks Q max amount of people out of QD people who applied for it. So 500 out of 1,000 people will get it. So there's a 1/2 chance that all these individuals, any one of them will get this. Okay. But the game doesn't stop here. Now what happens is, suppose somebody who has a valuation very low for this product gets it, and somebody who has a very high valuation doesn't get it. So this guy doesn't get it, whereas this guy gets it. So suppose I have a valuation for phone. Suppose valuation for person one for this guy is, let's say, 800, whereas valuation for person two is only suppose price is kept at 300. The equilibrium price should have been 500. Suppose somebody with a valuation of 450 gets it, or 350 gets it. This guy gets it, whereas this guy doesn't get it. So what will happen is that the person who has a valuation of 350, he bought the product. because the price was very low at 3. But now he can go on OLX and he can sell it to somebody else. He knows that there are people who have a higher valuation for this good than he has, and uh, what he does is he goes on a black market like OLX, and he says that, okay, I have this phone and I am willing to sell it. So these two people will now meet on this other platform called OLX, which is the black market, and they will trade with. They're going to trade this product. So when this trading happens, finally what will happen is everybody who got the product on the lower side of the demand curve, they will trade their products to people on the higher side of the demand curve in exchange for money. And ultimately, the equilibrium price on OLX will be the price required to clear this market. So the equilibrium price will be price to clear quantity. Okay, I'm just giving this as analytical things for you to know. क्या होता है when the government or even private firms see a mismatch in demand and supply. You won't get numerical questions on this. Numerical questions will come for the cases that we have already studied. Taxation hai, subsidy hai, to usme kya hai. In these cases, we are just understanding it analytically that what kind of issues happen. So if you're keen about it, abhi Big Billion Day sale aa raha hai. So if maybe Xiaomi or OnePlus is launching some flagship in it, maybe just after the launch, you will see OLX may that product will be sold at a price higher than what it is being sold at on Flipkart. So OLX Pay, the same product gets sold at a price higher than Flipkart. So as soon as the person gets an order confirmation, he puts it on OLX, and this is something which actually happens. I don't know if you have noticed it, but you can. So Apple is launching iPhone 13. On the day it gets launched, okay, the day the sale happens, right after it, you can go and check on OLX, and you will see people posting iPhones on OLX at a price higher than what Apple is charging. Okay, so that's black market. So in this case, consumer surplus will again be this much. This much is going to be the black market revenue, and the remaining thing is your producer surplus. The third kind of case is random allocation without resale option. You cannot resell. So an example for this is DDA flats. So you can apply for DDA flats, but there's this condition that you cannot sell it for 10 years at least. So DDA flats, the idea is providing affordable housing. But what used to happen is you're providing affordable housing, so people would sell it again. Okay. There's a property which should be valued at 1 crore. DDA is selling it at 50 lakhs. So somebody buys it at 50 lakhs and puts it upon the market for 1 crore. Then he gets a profit of 50 lakhs. So what they made a rule is, the rule is that you will not be able to sell it. If you get a DDA flat, you should not be able to resell it. So the idea is that if you are reselling it, effectively the problem remains the same, that it's no longer affordable housing. The price is still 1 crore. So it used to happen that a lot of times it used to happen that people would get this cheap housing from the government and they would sell it to somebody else and again live in squalor. So that was not solving the housing problem. That's why this rule was made. So in this case, the consumer surplus, will basically be a probability distribution over this region. Okay, because different people can get it with some probability. the probability of getting the house will be Q max divided by QD. Okay, so that requires higher level of statistics to be able to solve it. So you cannot solve it, but I just wanted to discuss these issues because they are interesting. Because you might actually see it happening in real life, and maybe next time you see something like this happen, you'll think, you'll know that why is this happening? What is the issue at hand because of which these rules are being made? Why is something selling for a higher price on OLX, which is supposed to be a market for second hand? So if you see these phenomena, maybe you will find it interesting. Okay, right. Economic efficiency and welfare. So I don't think I'll be able to wrap this up. Okay. Okay, so let's do these topics in the next class.